We have consecutive versus concurrent.
I was having a bit of a crisis. I was like, do I really want to do this still?
It might be harder to transition from concurrent into teachers college.
Always have a backup plan. You get into year 5 and you think you're prepared.
I hadn't really thought of teaching as a career path.
I would say as soon as you get into your placement, you realize why you're here.
Doing tutoring, working for nonprofits, teaching coding. This is the field I want to make an impact.
Instead of fighting each other, guys, we should all get along. Welcome to Keeping Up with Consecutives. Today we have a battle more anticipated than Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. We have consecutive versus concurrent, a representative from each program to talk about their experiences, some comparisons, and maybe help people who are applying think about if they would like to do concurrent or consecutive and kind of get to know what each program is about. On the left, the defending champion of concurrent, we have
Marianne. I'm in my 5th year of the concurrent education program for junior intermediate, and my teachable is French.
And the master coder himself, who do we have as well?
Pierce. I'm in my 1st year of the consecutive program, JI, with the teachable in science.
Full disclaimer, I'm in consecutive as well with the teachable of science. So Marianne, you are outnumbered. I would be afraid, honestly, if I were you, but you'll be able to. You'll be fine. It'll be fine. All right, this podcast will mainly be focusing on providing a comparison between the Teachers College portion of the concurrent and the consecutive programs. The concurrent is a 6-year program, so that includes a 4-year undergrad degree, which we won't touch on too much. Teachers College, year 1 is referred to as year 1/5 and year 2/6 because it's the 1st and 2nd year of the consecutive program and the 5th and 6th year of the concurrent program. So let's start with the application process into these programs. Concurrent students typically apply from high school, while consecutives apply after they've completed typically a 4-year degree, but other acceptable degrees count as well. So this kind of leads to the question that you guys can help answer. Which program do you think is hardest to get into?
I'll take a stab at this. And so I'd say the consecutive program is a bit harder to get into, given that you have to maintain your grades through a 4-year undergraduate program and get relevant teaching experiences in the process of the application. You're expected to explain how your experiences line up with working with youth, teaching lessons. And so finding the time, especially if you're someone who maybe doesn't know teaching is the thing they want to do right away, then finding those experiences that will make you a strong candidate. And given the low admission rates to the consecutive program, it is a challenge, whereas concurrent, you are just keeping up your grades through high school. And I'm not sure if you're judged on as much on your experiences working with youth leading up to, because you'll have time in the 4 years of concurrent.
Yeah, I would agree to an extent. It's definitely challenging to maintain high marks in your undergrad and then apply into Teachers College afterwards, whereas concurrent students, they have to maintain those marks in high school, which is a little bit easier than in an undergrad program in university. But that's not to overlook the hard work to maintain those marks while you're in the concurrent education program. I know sometimes it might not be fully achievable to get into the year 5 and 6 because of an inability to maintain those marks in your teachable subject or education and child and youth studies courses as well. So
yeah, I think if you're a high school student that is applying to concurrent programs, or even they're thinking about why would I apply to a concurrent when I can apply to a consecutive program afterwards, consecutive might benefit you a little more. You might get to explore some of your interests on the way during your 4-year undergrad. It is a high-risk competitive admission rate to get into a consecutive program. At Brock, I believe our teacher told us it was a single-digit % admission rate, and everybody else was they had to go somewhere else. So I think concurrent is more safe, and if you want to get into consecutive, it's more risky.
Yeah, I have some friends right now applying for consecutive for the upcoming year in September, and there's definitely no guarantee of where you want to go. Brock obviously doesn't accept everyone who applies. You might have to go up to Nipissing, and if you're from Southern Ontario, that could be a little challenge. Or again, you might have to go to the States. It's very difficult to get into the Teachers College program.
Now that we've covered applications, let's get into the location of the program. So now that you've been accepted into concurrent, that's your 6 years, or your consecutive of your 2 years. Concurrent takes place at the Brock St. Catherine's campus for the first 4 years, and then after the first 4 years of your undergrad, or however long you take to do your undergrad, the 2 years of Teachers College could be at Burlington, or they could be at St. Catherine's, and I think Marianne has some stories about this.
Yeah, so if you're in concurrent education, after year 4, you have the option to state like a preference of what campus you would like to do your last 2 years. So there's a Burlington campus and then a St. Catherine's campus. Personally, I would have preferred the Burlington campus because I am from Burlington, but I got the St. Catherine's campus because of my Teachable. So one tip, I would suggest always have a backup plan if you especially live far. Thankfully, Burlington's not that far from St. Catherine's, so I'm making the commute. But if you live far, always have a backup plan because you might not get the campus that you want. So yeah, that's my tip.
It is a little bit frustrating that based just on your Teachable alone, that limits your campus preference. And it's interesting to see how resources are shifting around too. Whereas here, at the St. Catherine's campus, there's no instructional resource center where there is in Burlington. So,
especially if you're in concurrent, you've been at Brock, the St. Catherine's campus, for 4 years. You might have assumed at that point, I'm just going to stay right here. But consecutives, when they apply, they know, in our cohort especially, a lot of them are commuters. They know they have to commute. In the 5th and 6th year concurrents, they may not be expecting to commute as much, or they might be blindsided by the fact they have to go to Burlington all of a sudden for a whole year.
Yeah, sometimes you do get comfortable, but you are warned at the beginning of that process that it is the teacher's education program is an underestimated program. You do have to be prepared to, in terms of transportation, living, if you need to pay rent again for another year. So yeah, always be prepared. Don't get too comfortable.
Solid advice. So we've talked about the applications and the location. Next, let's talk about the classes. So I'll leave Marianne to think for a little bit. Pierce, how do you feel in these classes? Is anything new content to you? Anything old content you might have experienced before?
I would say in the first term, so in the fall classes, it was definitely a different way of thinking about education, creating our philosophies, and then thinking about how we going, since I hadn't taken a math course in a while, and thinking about how you and we were talking about elementary math, so thinking about how you teach math, which is different compared to how you learn it. So I would say that there was new knowledge and just a different way of thinking in terms of then compared to my undergraduate degree. And then in the classes in the second term, there was some repetition, we do the philosophy, a lot about talking about our teaching practice, but then just lots of conversation with what we learned for our practicum and what we'd apply in our next practicum.
So in your undergrad at Mac, you didn't take really any education classes or child and youth classes?
Closest thing I would take was really I minored in psychology, and so I had a bit of an understanding of some of Piaget, Vygotsky, those theories. So that wasn't new learnings, but in applying it in specifically an educational context, that was a different context.
So you would say, compared to your first and then second semester of Teachers College, there's been a little bit of repetition between the first and second semesters.
Some of the cognitive concepts, there's been some repetition, but it's not a terrible thing, because it does if you maybe didn't remember it, you do remember. But where it gets a bit interesting is you're asked to write the same philosophy in many different times in the same just slight variations.
Yeah. Marianne, any thoughts on repetition and new content versus old content in Teachers College?
There's a little bit of repetition. I would say that the structure of Teachers College, when you're experiencing how to teach different subjects, that's very different from the first 4 years. The first 4 years are mainly focused on theory, child and youth studies, again, those theories of Piaget, Vygotsky, and then you have your teachable subjects. That could be a little bit repetitive in the Teachers College portion, where in courses regarding students with exceptionalities, we have learned a lot about some strategies to incorporate differentiated instruction, universal design for learning, and then those theories as well to understand how children learn and how to meet their needs and strengths. So that part could be a little repetitive, a little bit of the teachable part too. I know I took a course last year in year 4 regarding how to teach French. I know it wasn't a mandatory course, but it was very similar to the French course I had to take this year in year 5. So just be prepared of a little bit of overlapping, but some other subjects like the sciences, literacy, math, that's something that we never did prior to year 5. So I'd say that's beneficial for sure.
Yeah. Also talking about the classes, there's a lot of profs. And Marianne, I've heard some of the profs who teach in Teachers College have also taught, maybe you've even had them as a prof in 3rd and 4th year education classes in Concurrent.
I haven't. All of mine are new. A lot of my instructors too are retired teachers or retired principals. So it's been nice to hear their experiences and their connections to what we're learning and how they've implemented it in their own practice. Whereas I feel that the last 4 years have been mostly like content-based, theory-based. So it's nice to have those instructors show us a new perspective of how to actually implement those theories from personal experience. I'm someone who actually likes to learn from concrete examples of how they are used to familiarize myself with how I can use it too. So I haven't had an experience where I've overlapped with a prof yet.
I have heard, though, some of them, and they've told us in classes, they do teach some 4th year classes. So it's kind of nice to see some overlap, and there could be a scenario where you're in your 4th year of Concurrent, and then in your 1st year of Teachers College, same teacher again, same prof, they might know you a little bit, but yeah, there seems to be some overlap in the profs that teach each of the classes. So getting into the Practicum, Marianne, do you feel Concurrent prepared you for Practicum more than a consecutive student, for example?
I think so. I had a course in year 4 regarding assessment. That was probably like the most beneficial course I took. And we also had another assessment course. I know yours was a lot longer. I think yours was 12 weeks, right? Ours was only 6 weeks because we do have that prior knowledge from year 4. But our year 4 course was a full year. And that taught me how to implement backwards by design. So creating a culminative task before creating lessons, how to differentiate instruction. I think it just exposed me to more opportunities to create my own lesson plans and assessment tools, so I could effectively implement that in my placement. That was just one example. My teachable too, I have more experience working with how to teach French in the classroom. Only because we did have to take those required courses, at least 3 full credits. So I think I have that advantage, but you could prove me wrong. I don't
Pierce,
know.
do you think consecutives may have a little advantage in their Practicum, or do you think they're disadvantaged?
I think it depends on your experience, like going into Practicum. Like we, in our cohort, for example, we have some people who would like supply teach beforehand. And so that's like really like invaluable classroom management experience. And you kind of have a sense like, because that is a big factor going into Practicum, like feeling comfortable in front of the classroom. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but do you have like any community like placements like type in Concurrent?
We were supposed to in second year, but because of COVID, it was an observational placement only. We unfortunately didn't get to do that. We did have a tutoring course where we worked one-on-one with a student with exceptionalities with literacy, but we were never really placed at the front of the classroom working with classroom management skills. So this was the first time for all of us, or some of us like do have that experience, but not in the actual program.
Yeah, I'd say like it all depends on experience like leading up to your first practical. I would say that the biggest challenge like is like being like keeping up with like lesson plans. Like I imagine for someone in Concurrent would have already been exposed to the Brock lesson plan, whereas consecutive like they were trying to like just get us prepared in that like that 4-month period before our first practicum. So that was a challenge, and then we do spend more time in assessment learning, but it's still like not the same as like spending like a whole year worth. You make some good points of how a concurrent student would be more prepared.
I think that a concurrent student would have 4 years of theory, and then they'd be basically itching at that point to get into a classroom. And then they get into a classroom, they have all this theory that they've learned over the last 4 years, who knows, and they've got to apply it into the classroom. And maybe that could go well, maybe it could go a little problematic, who knows? But as myself, as a consecutive student, I liked the basically they jam you with information in the first semester, and then right away you're in your practicum. I didn't learn all about how to deal with all that theory and then wait 4 years before I got into a classroom. I got to learn the info and then get in there right away. So I think that was a little beneficial for keeping it in the back of my head and keeping an open mind. So
it is nerve-wracking, like when you learn all this theory, all these strategies, but you've never implemented them yourself, and then you get into year 5 and you think you're prepared, and then you get into the classroom and it can be totally different. Some strategies do not work for you whatsoever. It really depends on the classroom culture and the diversity in the classroom too. So in a way, we kind of all start from the beginning, although we have more experience with that knowledge and theory. Starting off on the first day was like a new learning experience for me, because that was the first time I've ever been in the classroom and taken charge myself. So
it doesn't matter who you are or how you got to where you are. When you're in the classroom for the first day, it's all hands on deck. You got to figure it out.
And even I would say, like, I'd had experience in front of the classroom teaching coding beforehand, and that still doesn't prepare you as much for like your like in terms of like behavior, like the responsibilities there and like the planning. So yeah, it really, you are just starting from zero.
Yeah. But luckily we have our communities of students, our cohorts to help us out, some friends from concurrent classes. So let's get into the community a little bit. In consecutive, going into it, most of us, 99% of us, didn't know each other. In concurrent, you may know people for 5 or almost 6 years at this point. How would you describe the consecutive community, Pierce?
The consecutive community, I think, is everyone's very friendly. Like we've come from different backgrounds and all bring different perspectives, but we're able to like come together and like have like kind of find like common interests. Everyone is like willing to share like their perspectives. There's often very like, good discussions and learning community, like professional learning communities that like help us like discuss topics. So the overall community vibe, I would say, is just very, very friendly, and like even though we just like met each other, just and welcoming overall.
I would say very welcoming, energetic, optimistic. And the first thing I noticed in Teachers College when we were all introducing our names, the active listening level of the cohort is through the roof. You will say anything, everybody has turned and is making eye contact with you, paying attention, absorbing what you're saying. The classroom is silent. I was just shocked compared to undergrad classes where half the people aren't listening. Even seminars, nobody's paying attention, somebody's on their phone. Everybody's invested, everybody wants to be there. Everybody wants to kind of get to know each other and vibe. How about the concurrent community, Marianne? You've got to represent probably 1,000 students if I had to guess.
I know, it's a lot of pressure. Honestly, I did know pretty much everyone in my classes, but I never made like a connection with them in undergrad. We were always grouped into like large classrooms, especially with COVID happening in the first year. We weren't able to make many connections. But I'd say in Teachers College, we were all familiar with who we were, and the PLC groups, table groups, just the classroom structure allowed us to all be like, yeah, we know each other. Like, I remember being in your seminar. I remember learning from you in this group project or whatever it is. So we were all pretty familiar with who we were, how we learn even, how we present, how we work together. You kind of already have a feel of like who you work well with as well. Though you might not be close with someone, you already know their strengths. So you kind of gravitate to certain people, but I'd say that everyone was very inclusive, very welcoming. It almost feels like high school again, where the whole class is just like one big friend group again. And it's awesome. Like I learn a lot from my peers, even from classes, or they'll bring up classes that we took in 4th year, and they'll bring up an experience that I may have never heard because of the classroom structure in the last 4 years. But them bringing those experiences or those learnings into year 5 now has been awesome. Everyone's very welcoming too.
Honestly, both communities I think they have their own like pros and cons, I guess. Mm-hmm. Concurrent, you may have known these people for 4 years, which I guess could be a pro and a con. Yeah. For example, when I applied, I really wanted to meet a whole group of new people, And I got to do that, and I think it worked out really well because now I've talked to a bunch of them for like a half hour about various teachers' college topics on a podcast. So
yeah, that's true. It's unfortunate though that they like almost separate, or that the consecutives and concurrent students are almost separated pretty much entirely, because I would have loved to like learn from students who had a totally different undergrad. They might bring in experiences or learnings that are totally different from the concurrent. I feel like in a way sometimes we all think alike or have similar ideas. I had one consecutive student in my French class, and it was awesome learning from her and to see how much work she put into learning the French language, and what she did. I even applied those same strategies to my own learning. Even though I grew up learning French, her strategies like helped me improve so much more. So it was awesome to get to know that from a consecutive student.
Yeah, I think in both programs there should at least, and there have been some classes where they're all mixed up. They're overlapped a little bit. In our music class, for example, we had a bunch of concurrents, 5 or 6 of them, just how the schedule worked out, overlapped, and we got to talk to them about some stuff. And a lot of people found some friendships in there, and they worked really well. So
I think in cohort it could actually be beneficial because you have those discussions about like your teaching philosophies, and like that could be a time it would be beneficial to bring in like mix some consecutives and concurrent students.
100%. Like understanding like the consecutives experiences within their own, like being a student in their own educational experiences too, might be totally different than some of us in concurrent, especially if you come from a different school. I know you come from that McMaster, so your experiences throughout could be totally different than ours in the first 4 years, which may impact your teaching philosophy. So it would have been interesting to learn from that example.
more overlap next year, Teachers College people. Get it going. Kind of transitioning into speaking about the transition into Teachers College. Overall, Pierce, how would you describe the transition into Teachers College from your undergraduate program?
So my undergrad degree ended up being a bit longer than I expected. It was a 4-year program. I took 5 years for a variety of reasons. One being COVID and wanting to get like that experience and really like proper like final year of university. I would say the transition, it was like all about like doing like really making sure that I wanted to do like go into teaching and like doing tutoring, like working for nonprofits, teaching coding, and like so the transition was about like just like building some of those skills and like seeing like, yeah, this is where I want to, like this is the field I want to like make an impact.
Do you think the transition might have been easier for you as a consecutive, or would it have been easier as a concurrent?
I think it was easier as a consecutive because I had like gone through like a degree and like I knew how to learn in university, so there wasn't like a whole relearning. Like if I was coming from concurrent, I would have to be like learning how to like learn in university and also gear towards like education. Granted, you do have like 4 years where you're kind of preparing for that, but I felt having a degree under my belt, I kind of already knew how to learn in a university environment, which was helpful going into Teachers College, especially like given the different workloads between my undergraduate and the workload here.
I'm going to let Marianne go, and then I'm going to play devil's advocate so incredibly hard. Marianne, thoughts on the transition from concurrent?
The transition from like my last 4 years into the Teachers College? Okay.
Yes.
It was smooth sailing, honestly. It didn't even feel like a transition. It just felt like, oh, just another year. We don't have a graduation after 4 years. So it just felt like a continuous process. You see the same people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
it felt like a continuous process. So therefore, I have a theory, a thought. I think it might be harder to transition from concurrent into Teachers College than it is from consecutive. Because consecutive, you're going from a 4-year undergraduate degree, say in science, where you had to do all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you're doing Teachers College related or child and youth related stuff, which quite frankly is probably easier than anything you've done in your undergrad. Whereas concurrent, you've done 4 years of this program, and the transition is essentially non-existent. It is essentially a bonus 2 years. I'm not in the program. Yeah. I didn't do concurrent. I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
It seems to me like 4 years of the same program and then 2 more years of very adjacently related programs would be controversial for some people, especially because I have a fact to back this up. In our consecutive program, our cohort class, we had a guest speaker who I believe was in concurrent. in their 5th year. Or no, sorry, they had graduated like a year ago before us. And she talked about how the 5th and 6th years of Teachers College after concurrent were the hardest parts of the program for her. She had done supplying. She felt she knew everything about teaching. She really wanted to get her transitional certificate, but she couldn't yet. And then she showed us text messages of her and her mom. Her texting her mom saying, I can't do this anymore. It's the same stuff again.
Yeah.
That was years ago. However, I want to hear some thoughts on this from Marianne.
Okay, I will say my 5th year is definitely a lot different than my 4th and my last 4 years. In a sense, again, like the structure, you're learning how to teach certain subjects most of the time. There are some overlapping classes, a couple, where you kind of learn a bit of the same content. It's more so how to integrate it into the classroom, though. I will say that during my 5th year, first term, right before my placement, I was having a bit of a crisis. I was like, do I really want to do this still? Because again, we were still learning those theories that I've been learning in the last 4 years, some different as well. Not everything's the same, but it was very familiar. I was seeing everyone is the same. Everyone is the same in the classes.
You guys again?
No. It's nice working with everyone. Yeah. But it was continuous, and 4 years is a long time. When you're entering a 5th, it's of this almost the same structure, the same 4 walls you're going into. It was hard, but I would say as soon as you get into your placement, you realize like why you're here. You might find that some things that you learned in class are totally different than your personal experiences. You might find that some strategies that you learned in class or from other peers are very beneficial, but until you get into that placement, you won't know really whether you want to be a teacher or not. I would recommend staying until that first placement. Like, that's going to solidify whether you want to be a teacher or not. Do not get caught up in so much theory or put yourself down because you are almost learning some of the same things. Some of it. Like, not everything is the same. I just want to preface. Not everything.
I'd say that finishing, well, I guess the 2 years, that 2-year, not crawl, but basically crawl through your practicum, through more classes, through 2 more practicums from a concurrent perspective would be really challenging. I don't think you're alone in that mental crisis. Yeah. Let us know in the comments, concurrent students, if you're watching this, if you had a mental crisis as well, transitioning into the first year of Teachers College, because I don't think you're alone in that. I think that's why I wanted to cover it. It's a very interesting transition, which is very unique compared to consecutive. So.
Yeah.
So now that we've covered all the controversial topics, I want to ask both of you a question. Would you change anything? If you could go back in time, would you switch to concurrent/consecutive? So would you apply to the other program instead of yours?
Personally, I wouldn't. I would stay in concurrent. I knew since I was in grade 5 that I wanted to be a teacher. I grew up with a family of teachers. So knowing that you want to be a teacher going into university, I would highly recommend the concurrent education program so you don't have to go through that stress of applying into Teachers College.
It was stressful.
Yeah, no, I remember for you, Jacob, it was stressful.
It was stressful.
But definitely go into concurrent if you know right off the bat that you want to be a teacher. Also, do not give up on yourself in year 5. If you're feeling that repetition or you're feeling that burnout, just wait until that placement. You'll find out who you are as a teacher for yourself, what works for you and why you're really there and why you enjoy it. You'll almost reconnect with that passion of teaching again. So don't give up after 5 years. That's why I still recommend the concurrent education program.
Pierce, you got anything? Would you have done, knowing what you know now, would you have gone back and taken concurrent education or stayed in consecutive?
I would have actually stayed in consecutive because I think my undergrad kind of shaped me into becoming a teacher. It wasn't like hadn't really thought of teaching as a career path before my undergrad, and I think there were experiences like learning fundamentals of science and science communication was really valuable, and so and then it just happened that wanting to communicate science and pay forward the mentorship I received during my undergrad kind of led me towards teaching. So I would say it was beneficial because I was able to explore lots of different pathways because I didn't know I wanted to go into teaching. So I would say that I'd remain applying to the consecutive program. Granted, yes, there was stress involved, but I think that kind of when I was waitlisted the first time, I think it was just a reminder that there's more I can do and to like gain experience and be like a stronger applicant.
Yeah, so as a consecutive student as well, I still do not know. I think that I would have maybe switched into concurrent if I could have kept the science, work towards those science teachables. I believe you can do a Bachelor of Science maybe in concurrent, but just the type of work concurrents have to do, like all this essay stuff and analyzing
There's
articles.
A lot of writing.
I would much rather do science stuff and learning about the human body and like human sexuality and all that stuff compared to just doing essays on child and youth topics. But that's just how I think.
In concurrent, you do have like, especially in my fourth year, for the junior intermediate program at least, there were a lot of electives going into your fourth year, so you could take those like science courses if you really wanted to, but again, you're limited because you still have to take those education and child and youth study courses. So you do need to have an interest in education and in teaching. I know in my fourth year, I had a lot more room for electives, at least for the junior intermediate program. I know it differs between primary, junior, and senior intermediate, but that does allow for taking a lot more science electives, but again, you are limited to those education and child and youth study courses as well along the way to your fourth year. You really do have to have an interest in education going into the concurrent education program. I know I always did in high school. I was always interested in Indigenous education, learning different learning style preferences, because at the end of the day, teaching isn't only teaching the concepts and the subjects that you're interested in, it's also supporting students, making an impact for diverse learners, which I was always interested in going into concurrent education.
So essentially all of us would change nothing. We would keep it exactly how it was, how it worked out. So yeah, these two programs, they appeal to different situations people are in, so I think it all depends on your individual situation on which works best for you. However, in the news recently, Teachers College has been rumored to go to 1 year as of late. Thoughts on these programs going to maybe 1 year? Would that change your decision? Let's say concurrent goes from 6 years to 5 and consecutive goes to 1 year. Do you think that might have changed your opinions a little bit if it's only 1 year?
I don't think it would change my opinion at all. Like, I would still be interested in the years 1 to 4 courses. Having that 5th year and then being done would be amazing. But I know that there are other important courses in year 6 that we do have to take that are different from year 5. So, but still, I would still remain in concurrent education. Although the 5 years would be nice to limit some of those overlapping content and teachings. So.
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add on to that. I'd agree. Like, I think if it was 1 year, we'd get like less practicum time. So, yeah, I would agree mostly with what she said there.
I believe this isn't really between consecutive versus concurrent, but in both programs, you do have to account for if you take French, or you might have to take a bonus class in both programs.
I think it's the same amount, just I have that added French.
Yeah.
Not if you do not want to teach French, you do not have to take French.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the added French course.
All right, and do we have any other closing thoughts or topics we'd like to touch on between consecutive and concurrent? But
are you going to change your podcast name?
After having this conversation, we are no longer keeping up with consecutives. We're keeping up with consecutives and concurrents. So maybe I should call it keeping up with candidates. I don't know yet. Maybe. I'll have to figure that out.
Drop a comment.
Drop a comment. Let me know. Real quick shout outs to big mega fans. Scott and Zoe have been some of the most dedicated fans, MVPs. They've told me they listen to every single episode when it comes out. And I also have to shout out apparently Zoe's mom and Alicia's mom, who have both listened to the podcast at one point or another. We're truly branching out to reach new demographics. And on that note, I hope we can branch out to reach the concurrent demographic as well. Because instead of fighting each other, guys, we should all get along.
Work together.
I should also say this versus dynamic, it's more of a fun thing. We're not actually angry at each other, you know, but it's just kind of a fun little thing. Like, oh, there's a concurrent student.
It was very nice to hear a different perspective.
Yeah,
very nice to hear from the other side. Last things, I have questions from the audience. A question from Cameron who says, which Shrek character do you relate to the most? Pierce, you want to start this one off?
Sure. I have to just go with the classic Shrek. He has like lots of layers. He's resilience. I was sometimes a bit clueless, and sometimes I can see it be a bit out of it. So I would say like I'd relate with Shrek. He's just a very, for the most, on the whole, a dependable guy.
Marianne, you got anything?
I'm gonna have to agree. I'm gonna relate to Shrek. Sometimes he can be stuck in his own ways, but you have to learn from others to kind of peel those layers. Learn from Donkey, learn from Fiona. So that's what I hope to do. You got to continue engaging in that ongoing learning.
You got to get engaged and listening to this podcast more. That's what I want
Yeah.
everybody to do to take away from this. But yeah, thanks for listening. That about closes it out. If you have any questions, let me know if we should talk about some other stuff. But yeah, thanks for helping to bridge the gap between the two sides of the river.
Thanks for having us, Jacob.
Thank you. Thanks, Jacob.
No beef even.
No beef.
No beef.
Just working together.
All right, let's end this on a handshake.
Okay. Solid.
Thanks for watching. See ya.